Welcome, everyone. We are going to get started in just a minute or two. We're waiting for some folks to join us. In the meantime, I welcome you to put in the chat where you're calling in from this evening, and if you have visited either Montpelier in Central Virginia, home of James Madison, or if you've been to Independence National Historical Park in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. We'd love to hear about your stories if you've visited these sites. And if not, you'll know plenty about both of these places and get a little sneak peek this evening. And again, we'll get started in just a minute or two. Until then, we have Independence National Historical Park joining us from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And this evening, we're calling in from James Madison's plantation estate in Central Virginia. And it looks like we have some folks joining us who have been to both Independence and Montpelier. So we've got some folks from Philadelphia calling in. Looks like they're supporters of the park. We also have some folks who visited Montpelier. We've got folks from Wisconsin, some from North Carolina. We've got Ohio represented, OH. Wonderful. It's great to see folks from all over. We've got Illinois. Got a good representation of folks who have visited both sites. So we've got a lot to cover this evening, and we're going to explore actual places themselves. So we'll go ahead and get started. Hopefully folks will continue to join us. So I want to welcome everyone and thank you all for being with us tonight. We're really excited about this program. We're going to explore some of the most, really significant places in American history tonight. We have Montpelier, which is James Madison's plantation in Central Virginia. That's where I'm calling in from. That's where Patrick in the old library is calling in from. But we also have Independence National Historical Park located in Philadelphia. So I'm Katie Crawford-Lackey. I am the director of the Robert H. Smith Center for the Constitution, which is located at Montpelier. And I'll be having this dialogue with both of these places this evening. So I'm joined by staff from both Montpelier and Independence National Historical Park. So as I said, we have Patrick Campbell. He's the assistant director of the Robert H. Smith Center for the Constitution at James Madison's Montpelier. He will be talking to us about Madison's influence at the convention. And he is in the old library on the second floor of the mansion house where Madison lived. And then we have Suzanne Moore, who is a park ranger of interpretation at Independence National Historical Park. And she's been with the park since 2019 and worked at Gateway National Recreation Area before her time at Independence. And we also have Lou Copley, who has worked as an interpretive park ranger at Independence since 2015. And he grew up in Philadelphia and graduated from Temple University. So I think a good question to start off our program tonight is, why are we teaming up to talk to you about these two places? What's the connection? And 236 years ago, America was a young nation facing a host of challenges, including potential financial ruin and even dissolution. It was during this war for independence from British monarchy that a group of statesmen drafted what was called the Articles of Confederation, which set up a system of government run by a Congress. And this is essentially the structure that governed the colonies as they fought for independence. But the Articles of Confederation weren't very effective because they did not give Congress the authority to tax, to regulate trade, form an army, regulate currency. So by 1783, when the colonies had won the war, were independent states, the Articles did not provide a very effective functioning structure of government. And there was a lot at stake, including this democratic experiment. So these are the challenges that a 36-year-old James Madison is facing in May of 1787 as he's heading to Philadelphia, where he and these other delegates from other states are meeting at Independence Hall. And that building was originally the Pennsylvania State House. So these delegates are there, they're meeting that summer, and their goal is to revise the Articles of Confederation. But what they accomplished instead was really revolutionary, a new framework of government that was both national and local. So the convention concludes that September with the signing of the US Constitution, which is this written plan that says what our government should do and how it should be organized and run. So as we talk about this history, we're really exploring it through the power of our different places. So we're telling the story of the convention from May through September 1787, through Montpelier and through Independence Hall. And this is an important lens to look at history because places are our tangible links to the past, and they give us this opportunity to explore and make connections across time that written documents don't necessarily provide us. So these places are helping us understand our history, what happened and also why. So as we kind of go through this program and talk with Patrick, Suzanne, and Luke this evening, I encourage everybody listening in to think about the legacy the founders created that summer. What do these principles that they were thinking about and establishing in our government, what do they mean to us today, and how are we carrying on that legacy? So as we go on, I ask you to put any questions you do have in the chat, and we'll have time at the end to go ahead and answer some of those. So as we get started here this evening, I want to turn it over to Patrick, because in a way, the story kind of starts at Montpelier in this old library. So Patrick, in turning it over to you, can you tell us a little bit about where you are sitting and kind of the story of that place?
Yes, I'm in, as you said, the old library. I'm on the second floor of James Madison's original home in Orange County, Virginia. This room had started out as a bedroom, we think, for him when he's a teenager. But he comes back here in his 30s. And James Madison is probably the biggest book nerd you ever knew. Maybe one of the smallest politicians, but probably the biggest book nerd. And we have accounts of visitors from the 1780s coming here, and they say they cannot see from wall to wall in this room, that he's got thousands of books. And I think most of you could guess what he's reading. He's reading the Greeks, he's reading the Roman philosophers, he's reading the Enlightenment philosophers like Jean-Jacques Rousseau and Baron de Montesquieu and David Hume and John Locke. He's reading about the Swiss confederations, he's reading about the Germans. He's an absolute book nerd. But one of the differences with Madison is then he writes about it. He assigns himself these research papers, these theses, these term papers, and one of them he calls Vices of the United States Political System. And in Madisonian fashion, it's got 11 points. And all of the points have, paragraphs describing about how the Confederation has violated the law of nations and treaties, and it's encroached upon other states' rights, and it's failed to guarantee the rights of citizens. So he's written this, he writes notes on ancient modern confederacies. And so this place is really the crucible for so many of his ideas.
Sounds like truly a really, really powerful place. And I'm wondering, because there's a famous quote by John Meacham. He says, the American miracle can be traced back to that room, the one that you're sitting in now. Can you tell us why? Why does he say that?
I love that term, the American miracle, and I think it's something we forget about a lot. In 1787, when the Constitution's written, it's the first federal system in the world. It had never happened before where we've given sovereignty to our state governments, or what we now call subnational governments and national governments. In fact, it's so unique that when Madison is writing in some of the Federalist Papers, especially in Federalist 39, he almost doesn't know what to call it. And he's arguing to the people of New York and really the people of the Confederation to ratify this Constitution. And you hear him saying, well, it's national in this respect, but it's federal in this respect. But it's not really national, it's really more federal here. And I've showed civics teachers and government teachers Madison's language from Federalist 39, and they're looking at me like, what is he saying? And I'm saying he's trying to explain this American miracle, that it's really a brand new system, because kings and queens have never wanted to divide power, and confederations have wanted to hold power at the lower level and give a little bit of power to a higher government. But we have this system what's very different, with this state and federal tension. And a lot of you are looking at me now and thinking, yeah, the tension's still going on in 2023. But this tension of the new system, it really doesn't mean anything unless these ideas go to Philadelphia. So Madison's got, the 800-pound brain, but if he can't work as a politician, it's not going to matter at all. So the story in Philadelphia is where the American miracle really happens.
I think that's a great transition, and a great point about he's got these great ideas, but if they're not put into practice in some way, how much does it really mean? And so with that, I want to turn it over to Suzanne and Luke and ask them about the building behind them.
Hello, everybody. Just wanted to take a quick opportunity for Suzanne and I to say that we're really excited to be a part of this, and we're really happy to have you here at Independence Square. As you can see, the building in question is right behind me. So let me give you a nice view. So here is Independence Hall, as it's called today, from the backside. So this technically would have been the back door. Now, this building has been referred to as Independence Hall for about 2 centuries by now. But when James Madison and the Constitutional Convention were here, it was known by its original name, the Pennsylvania State House. So this building was initially constructed in the 1730s. Construction began in 1732 to be the capital of colonial Pennsylvania. Most of what you're seeing is original brickwork. About 80 to 90% of the brick are the same bricks that Madison would have seen, or George Washington as they strolled up to the convention. The tower is a little bit newer. It's from the 1750s. This upper part is early 19th century. And initially, when this tower was first constructed, a very famous bell that's still here in Philadelphia was installed to be on top of it. The Liberty Bell, now cracked, sitting in a museum right across the street. So though this building began its life as the State House, it is now definitely Independence Hall, and sometimes Constitution Hall.
So can you tell us a little bit more about some of the groups who met at this building and why it was chosen as the meeting place for this Constitutional Convention in 1787?
All right, so this building, as Luke said, was the Pennsylvania State House. So they put the 3 branches of colonial and then later the state government in this building. So as we get a little bit closer, so you can see where some of these locations were for these different branches. Up on the second level over here, with these should be 3 windows, but from this angle, you can only see 2. But that room there would have been the governor's council chamber. So that's where most of the governors during that time frame, from when this building was built to 1799, that's where they worked out of, including Benjamin Franklin at one point. Then down on the first floor, we have the 2 other branches, and these are the 2 rooms we're going to be checking out tonight. On this side over here, underneath the governor's council chamber, that is the Pennsylvania Supreme Court room. And then over on this side, this is the assembly room right over in here. So that is the legislative body. And in order to make money sometimes, or extra money for the treasury, they would rent out that room. That's why we get the Second Continental Congress in the 1770s. They're the ones who would create the Declaration of Independence, adopt it, and sign it in that very room in 1776. And then the same thing 11 years later with the Constitutional Convention, they would be allowing to have that room rented out during that time. And the assembly, if you're wondering where they go during that time, they would go right upstairs into these windows here. And then on the front side where we can't see, there's a long gallery where people could come in for state dinners, which would be with music, dancing, and eating, all for the government of Pennsylvania and their invited guests. But now I think we're all ready to go in for the main event. So just like in those past times, they will be going in through the same doors as the founders and framers of this country. So just take a look around. What you see is what a lot of those people saw back in those days.
In a way, when we enter this building, we're following in the footsteps of so many historical figures who preceded us. James Madison, of course, Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, and throughout American history, people will visit this building, much in the way that people still do today. So let's have a look. This is the interior of the tower. Much like the brickwork outside, a good portion of what you're seeing in here is original 18th century materials, hand-carved woodwork. The circle here could be removed, and the Liberty Bell, then the State House bell, was installed through there in the 1750s. One notable piece of original material is this handrail right here. So we can imagine that all those figures who have passed through these halls, whether it was Franklin or Madison in the 18th century, or Martin Luther King standing here with the Liberty Bell during the Civil Rights Movement, have perhaps put their hand on this same handrail. So you can see the carved architecture in here, whether it's the Greek and Roman inspired columns and architecture, the faces above the doorway. A lot of what you see in this middle hallway is original to the 18th century. Our first stop is over here. As Suzanne pointed out from the outside, this is an old courtroom. It used to be the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania, but also used for criminal trials.
Luke and Suzanne, can you tell us if there's anything original in that room?
Certainly. So what we have over here, if you take a look up on the wall, try to get as close as possible to it. But you'll see there that there is a painting. That is the seal of Pennsylvania. It has 2 horses and an eagle on it, as well as a ship in the middle. And that is a George Rutter painting from 1785. And if you notice, it's pretty large size, and imagine what that wall would have looked like with nothing in it. Well, that's how it was for about 9 years, because on July 8th, 1776, as Luke has here, we have a reproduction of this symbol here, the coat of arms of King George III. See, on July 8th, 1776, The first official public reading of the Declaration took place out on the very square where we just were. And that afternoon, members of a local militia came into this room and ripped it off the wall and destroyed it that evening. And so for 9 years, that wall was barren. And so now, from 1785, 238 years ago, we have the seal of Pennsylvania. Otherwise, everything else in this room might be from the time period, although a lot of things are reconstructed, but original to this building, most likely not. But that we definitely can pinpoint.
Now, it looks like as you were walking around the room that there's a cage in the middle there. Can you
Oh,
talk
yes.
to us about that?
Oh, certainly. And uh-oh, Luke, it looks like you're in trouble.
Well, this is a reproduction of something called a prisoner's dock. So this is where somebody would quite literally in the 18th century have to stand trial if they were accused of a crime. But under English common law, you were granted and would expect certain things, like trial by a jury of your peers, being innocent until proven guilty, perhaps having a public trial. Your cases had to be framed against you, whether it was in your defense or in your prosecution. You know, much in the same way that the Virginia plan would help frame the Constitution eventually created in the room right across the hall.
So maybe we can also find out if you're guilty or not.
And you mentioned the creation of the Constitution here at where you all are at Independence Hall. And I think this is a good point to turn back to Patrick and ask a little bit about, because some of the core ideas that went into the Constitution were thought of and written here at Montpelier. And so I want to ask Patrick a bit more about why Madison is considered the father of the Constitution and his role in all of this.
Well, Katie, the easy answer is an 1827 toast in Philadelphia by Charles Ingersoll, when he says essentially, if George Washington is the father of our country, James Madison is the father of the Constitution. The maybe longer answer is it's not just the Virginia plan that he takes from here to Philadelphia. It's the speeches in Philadelphia. It's the ability to persuade people. It's the Federalist Papers that he's writing when enlisted by Alexander Hamilton. It's the Bill of Rights that he introduces in 1789, right after the first Congress gets started. And so when he dies, really a longtime rival, John Quincy Adams, our sixth president, calls James Madison the father of the Constitution again when he dies. So there's really a lot of ways that we could consider Madison the father of the Constitution. The penman of the Constitution is Gouverneur Morris, another Pennsylvanian. So Madison says many hands, many minds write the Constitution. He never, that we know of, uses that term about himself, but others consider him the father of the Constitution.
And was the Virginia plan written in the room that you're sitting in right now?
Yes and no. So there's a few versions of the Virginia plan, and we actually probably don't have the original one here or the one that he gets Governor Randolph to introduce in Philadelphia. I forgot to tell you, my political action hero in my mind is about 5'2". He's about 105 to 110 pounds as an adult and has a softer voice. So my political action hero gets somebody else to introduce the plan that he's written here. The versions of the Virginia plan are probably between about 15 and 19 resolutions. So we have a surviving one from Philadelphia that's 19. But as a politician, he gets to Philadelphia and the delegates haven't all gotten there. So Suzanne and Luke have done a great job of talking about, hey, who are all the people moving through these spaces that's so important, and that we don't have a quorum yet. And so Madison starts working, especially with the Pennsylvanians and the others who are already there, and say, what do you think about my plan? So you're going to have compromises in the plan. So the beauty of this Madison, to not only study with all these books and look at his thousands of years of history and kind of bring it together and write plans about it, but then to engage with others in the room, and often to disagree with others in the room, but still keep the conversation going, still keep the dialogue going of how do you make self-government work. If there's anything Madison wants to talk about, is how do you make a republic work? How do you make a democracy work? How do you make government by the people work? Madison, he wants to talk about that from the time he's in college till he passes away in this home at the age of 85.
So at the very best, his ideas are really an intriguing philosophical statement. If you can't get the support of the men in the room that we're just about to see at Independence Hall.
Right, going back to that room, Katie.
So I'm curious if Suzanne and Luke will show us a bit more of the room where it happened.
Oh, we would be happy to. And I think Patrick really summed it up perfectly, though, the pressure of not just creating this plan, but having to walk through these halls, enter this room, and try and convince other Americans, but from different states with perhaps different opinions, that this would be the plan that would help kind of save this young nation, which was at an interesting precipice. So let's have a look of perhaps the perspective of these gentlemen as they entered this space. Now, this is usually where you would have to stay, but hey, we can go behind the bar. So see a little bit more up close and personal than you would be if you came here on a tour.
Now, Luke and Suzanne, is this how the room would have looked during the actual convention in 1787?
Now, that's a great question, and it's one that we really can't definitively answer. Now, park curators have been going through all kinds of information and documents to try and, to the best of their ability, recreate what this place was during the 18th century. Now, I will say that this setup from about the 1950s, it really leans more towards 1776. I mean, they're getting ready for the bicentennial here in Philadelphia, across the country. This, in a lot of ways, reflects 1776. Now, we have it set up, and once again, this is just an educated guess. The 13 tables in the semicircle here were for the 13 original colonies. So in our seating chart, the northern colonies are up here on the north side of the room, and the southern ones are down here. Now, as maybe some of you folks already know, the Constitutional Convention was quite controversial. People were a little bit suspicious that maybe there's some sort of federal idea brewing. So the smallest state wanted nothing to do with this. So Rhode Island didn't show up to the Constitutional Convention. After some of these ideas were introduced, New York gets up and they leave. And Hamilton ends up being really the only delegate from New York, and he's back and forth. So were all of these gentlemen here at the same time? Were they all sitting by state? We really can't definitively say. Now, I saw someone in the chat mention the heat and humidity here in this room. And that's a great point, because I do feel that as best we can get in terms of historic accuracy and all the artifacts that are on the table, the inkstands, the candlesticks, the books, even the chandelier, this is all 18th century. But is this really what it would have looked like? Is this really what it would have felt like? Or is this a bit of an idealized version from our more modern selves? This probably would have been a lot messier, right? we have tobacco pipes on the table, but nobody smoked in here in decades. That's not the case during the Constitutional Convention. There would have been smoke in here. Who knows what's being tracked in from the Philadelphia streets into this room? The windows were closed, probably extremely hot in here. So is this what it looked like? We can't exactly say. But it is the same space where these events happen, the same walls that house this convention.
And I have a question from the chat that I think is relevant to what you were just talking about in terms of some of the seating and the different
Sure.
southern versus northern states. Is there a reason why the convention was held in Philadelphia versus Boston? Was there a need to get southern states to attend, so Philadelphia was a better location?
Yeah, I think it's all about location and amenities. Philadelphia was the largest city in early America. It had lots of boarding houses, lots of inns, centrally located, was a good place. This was one of the largest buildings. And if you go to Boston State House, it's quite a bit smaller than the Philadelphia one. But I do think that it's geographically convenient. It had amenities that could house, all like 50 upper class gentlemen at the same time. Not everywhere in America could handle that kind of, influx of gentlemen. So it's a combination of things, but yeah, I think the location is the main one.
Also, the National Congress under the Articles at that time were in New York. So there might have been a want of separateness from them as they are going to go over those articles initially.
Good point.
And can you tell us, you talked a bit about attendance. We know Madison was there for the whole time. He attended every day, unlike some of the other delegates. Can you tell us where he sat?
Well, once again, this is something that we're not totally sure about, but we do have something that he wrote in his notes on the Constitutional Convention, right? This momentous task that he undertook to write down what was happening here in this room. Now, according to his notes, he said that he chose a choice position on the side of the president's table, somewhere in the center, which we can only surmise would be somewhere here in the middle of the room. So this is the president's table. Little platform. Now, generally for the Speaker of the Pennsylvania Assembly. So I guess we can imagine that maybe he'd be somewhere here, Washington side, because the secretary, the official secretary of the convention, would have probably been somewhere over here. So I think all we can really surmise is that it was somewhere here in the central location so that he could position himself to hear all these different conversations and speeches and put them into his notes on the convention.
And so George Washington would have been in the middle there in that central chair.
That's right. Yeah. Washington arrives to the convention somewhat amidst a little bit of controversy. He had to be kind of convinced to come here. And he is immediately decided upon to be the president of the Constitutional Convention. So yes, he would have been the presiding member in the middle of the room, right there.
And we talked a little bit about the original purpose of the convention. So the Articles of Confederation aren't really working, and the idea is to amend them. But can you tell us a little bit more about that and whether this was a more open public process, like people could attend? Was this a very private convention? What did the general session look like?
Well, I think a lot of delegates came here for different reasons. As we're hearing from Montpelier, the Virginians were very organized. They had a concrete plan that they were ready to introduce here. I don't think all the states really came here for that same reason. Some wanted to do just as was advertised, modify the Articles of Confederation, change maybe the small aspect of the national government. And the event was well known in the national media. There was quite a bit of interest. Why are all these people gathering here in Philadelphia? And I think, as you would probably imagine today, there was a little bit of suspicion here. I mean, what were all these people doing here in Philadelphia? And why did they take a oath of privacy, of secrecy? One of my favorite quotes is by another Virginian, Patrick Henry. He said that he smelled a rat here in Philadelphia, a rat that smelled like monarchy, talking about this convention. Now, the reason for the oath of privacy is apparently so that people could come here to Philadelphia from different states and they could sit in this room and they could throw any idea that came to mind against each other. And they wouldn't have to worry about what people back in their home state might think, how it might affect the future of their political career. So it was a private event. The windows were closed, not just for privacy, but also because it was apparently really loud outside. To give you a view of Chestnut Street here, it's still pretty loud. Sometimes when I'm giving a tour of this building, a big SEPTA bus rolls by, a public bus, and causes a lot of noise. So we do know that the Constitutional Convention requested that Chestnut Street here be covered in hay so that these loud carts going by, would be dulled a bit. The general, I think I'll let Suzanne answer about the general aspects of the Constitutional Convention. I don't want to do all the talking.
All right, so if I may just actually go off on one thing that you were saying is that with the secrecy and all, there was actually a group of Native Americans who had come up from the South, and their ultimate destination was New York City because they wanted to go to the National Congress and make sure that treaties were going to be abided by that had been solved in the past. And also the whole thing about the Northwest Territories and how that would be looked at for other Native nations. Well, they decided to do a stopover here in Philadelphia. And at the same time, the convention is going on and they're well aware of this. So they really wanted to be a part of this convention. They did meet with George Washington, who shook their hands, and that was made newspapers around the country about that. And also Henry Knox was the one who really was about stopping them from entering this convention. And he was actually able to convince them that everything will be fine, will work out in their order, and had them turn around, and they actually never made it to New York City. But that's one thing with the privacy, even though we all think this convention was done in secrecy, a lot of people knew and a lot of people actually wanted to add into this. As far as like everyday occurrences, this room that you see here, the assembly room, this would be used more so for meetings of the whole. So they would come in here, share different ideas. But then there are times where maybe they're assigned to certain committees and they would work on certain aspects of this new government that they are forming. And they would maybe then go separately to other locations. But then when it was time to meet again, this is where they would be. And they met quite often for each week. And remember, they were here from May to September of 1787. Through a very hazy, hot, humid Philadelphia summer.
You have to give it to Madison for showing up every day, taking notes, and attending despite kind of the conditions, the heat, the humidity. And I'm curious to know how the Virginia plan was received after he presented it to the gathering in the room you're standing in, Suzanne.
So Edmund Randolph, the governor of Virginia, was actually the one who was able to present that on Madison's behalf. And it's not exactly what everybody was looking at. To use Luke's words from earlier, they came here to see what was actually being advertised, and they saw this Virginia plan anything but. Some states like New Jersey came forward with their own plan. So, for example, the Virginia plan was about having this bicameral legislature that both houses would be represented based on the state's populations. And New Jersey and a few others did not like that idea because they felt it was against the smaller states. Smaller states should have less population. So they thought that they were going to be outnumbered in both houses. So New Jersey offered up having a unicameral or one house legislature. And that kind of reflects back to the National Congress that they already have up in New York. And the way that was working out, really, it's a Congress that comes together and then disbands the rest of the year. And remember too, they didn't have a head of state per se, like a president. So between the arguments back and forth on this particular subject, you have eventually Roger Sherman with the Connecticut Compromise, or the Great Compromise as it's sometimes called. And he said, how about a little bit from each plan? We'll take Virginia's idea of the bicameral. And while one house will be based on population, we would now call that the House of Representatives. And then another state solely based on however many votes per state, and it'll be equal across the board. So they settled on 2 senators. That's your Senate. So it's a lot of negotiation that went on here. When they first heard that something that doesn't sound like the articles, they really just, a lot of people reacted. And sometimes it was not a good reaction.
And this question of, I appreciate you talking about how this kind of compromise happened in trying to figure out our legislature. What, in thinking about that and some of the compromises and the challenges that the different delegates, these conversations, challenging conversations, who is really missing, whose voices are missing from this conversation, and how does this play out and affect what America looks like moving forward?
So of course, Rhode Island, as mentioned earlier, was left out. They were invited, but they decided not to show up because being the smallest state then, still the smallest state now, they felt that their opinion wouldn't have that much weight even in a committee like this. Also, as I mentioned earlier, there were the Native Americans who were not being represented in this room, although their thoughts and opinions were sought after by some of the people who sat in this very room. So for example, sometimes we like to say that Benjamin Franklin sat here, and he would be writing back and forth to the Native Americans and asking them some of their opinions. And particularly, he was interested in the Iroquois. And they had the Great Law, which really was looking at the federalism as well as the separation of powers. And of course, we sometimes have to reflect back on a letter that was written by John Adams's wife leading up to the independence, to remember the ladies in your new code of laws. They did not take any of that into consideration when they were planning out this convention here. Those who were enslaved, or even those who were free, were not taken into consideration. In fact, with slavery, they refused to put that word in there, although there are several clauses throughout the Constitution that alludes to slavery. And even in his notes on some of his copies of the Constitution, Benjamin Franklin would put in the margins that it was about slavery. So there were a lot of groups left out.
And obviously that had major implications for what America looks like, from decades, centuries up until today. And I'm curious to hear both your thoughts on how Americans have thought about this room throughout history, and what kinds of celebrations, protests, what kind of significant events have happened here beyond just the convention?
That's a great question. And, people have pretty early on assigned importance to this room. And as you said, have come here to celebrate, both the creation of the Constitution, but also the signing of the Declaration. And they've also come here to protest early on, feeling that they've not only been alienated from the Constitution that was created here, but these promises made here in 1776 about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and people being created equal, are not being fulfilled. Now, one item that has remained pretty static throughout these events is the chair that Washington would have used. So a lot of people who came to this room after the signing of the Constitution, both to celebrate and to protest, would have seen this chair with its sun carved onto the top, a sun that Benjamin Franklin optimistically hoped was a rising sun. Many people came here to fulfill this promise of a rising sun. And I just want to show you a couple of images very quickly that show you this room in the 19th century. So this is the same room that we're in right now, but presented quite differently. You can see the Liberty Bell in the corner. You can see a statue of George Washington. This is how the room would have looked for a good portion of the 19th century. This is how people like Abraham Lincoln would have seen it. Abraham Lincoln actually gave a speech right outside of that window where he said that he would rather be assassinated than fail to live up to the promises that were made here in this room at the creation of our nation. Now, this is the front page of the Philadelphia Inquirer, still around today. And it has an image of the room that we're standing inside of right now. This is Lincoln after his assassination, lying in state in the same room where this union that he fought to protect, where these ideals that he strove to live up to were signed. 10 years after this event is the centennial celebration. There's a massive celebration here in 1876. The bell on top of the tower now was installed for that celebration. Amidst it, a woman emerges from the crowd, Susan B. Anthony, with her Women's Declaration of Independence, inspired by the events that transpired here. And she wrestles her way to the front of the crowd out in the front of the building here and reads it to, I would imagine, a quite surprised crowd. The hallway out here that used to house the Liberty Bell had sit-ins for civil rights activists. So this building is never forgotten. It's been a place for people to think about the creation of the country. What does it mean to strive for that more perfect union, that the Constitution talks about in the preamble?
And we have some really intriguing questions from the audience. A couple of them ask about attendance. So questions about who else attended regularly, was, Jefferson there, Adams, but also, those plantation owners and slavers coming from the South, would they have brought enslaved people here, and would they have a presence in this room or in the building?
Well, that's a great question. Now, folks like John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, although they have great association to this building with the creation of the Declaration of Independence, they were serving as ambassadors in Europe during this decade, during this event. So they weren't present. So the old guard has kind of rescinded a bit, besides Washington, Franklin, Roger Sherman. And you start to see these newcomers like Madison and Alexander Hamilton take the lead. Now, it's very possible that these Southern plantation owners, or just enslavers in general, would have brought enslaved people with them to Philadelphia. But I don't know if we know if they were brought to this room specifically.
Probably not to this room, but they most likely brought them to where they were staying here in Philadelphia. The thing that they had to abide by, though, in 1780, Pennsylvania put in the Gradual Abolition Act. So that meant that they would have had to register their enslaved people to let them know that they were here in the state. And they would have also had to make sure that they abided by the 6-month rule, which was, if you're here for 6 months, now we know the convention didn't last for 6 months, but if it had gone a couple months longer, it would have. And if they stayed here for 6 months, they would have had to free their enslaved people. And some people, as we would later see down the road, like George Washington, when he was president here, they would actually rotate them in and out if they were going to spend a lot of time here.
And I'm wondering if I can put Patrick on the spot and ask about James Madison, and if we know anything about him bringing enslaved people with him to Philadelphia.
He does bring enslaved people to Philadelphia. We have more accounts of when he does it during the Continental Congress or Confederation Congress than we do from that summer in 1787. He brought a man who is William Gardner in the early 1780s. I would say it's highly likely that he brought probably at least one enslaved man to Philadelphia while he was doing his otherwise great work in helping this more perfect union. I really picked up on the word Luke used in terms of striving for a more perfect union.
And we have a question about kind of the secrecy aspect, the privacy aspect of the convention, and if there were concerns over foreign influence or even espionage, kind of taking some of the ideas that these men are talking about in the room.
You know, I don't know. I haven't encountered that being a reason. Now, by the 1780s, 80s, I guess there was still a concern about Great Britain. They still had occupied forts in American territories. And, I would think that they probably wouldn't be interested in a united country, United States. But I haven't encountered anything that seems to imply that they're worried about foreign espionage or undermining the country. I do remember, I think, reading something of an account of, I feel like it was Franklin, of feeling that if they didn't create a solid union in this moment, they could possibly be absorbed into perhaps one of these foreign powers or, European powers. So it feels to me, my understanding is that it was more about not inflaming the fears or the suspicions of the people who would eventually brand themselves as the anti-federalists, like Patrick Henry.
And to follow up on the question about enslaved people attending, our senior researcher, Hillary Hicks, put in the chat about John, an enslaved man named John, who attended. Madison brought John with him to the Constitutional Convention. And she actually authored a biography about John that I will share with everyone in the chat.
Oh yeah, I'd love to be able to read that.
Now, can you tell us a little bit more about, so Luke, you mentioned that George Washington is kind of convinced to attend. He's going to serve as president of the convention, but others like Patrick Henry, who you just quoted, refuses to attend. So if the idea is to kind of work on the Articles of Confederation and see what's advertised, why was there so much disagreement and kind of discord about attending if there's a lot of questions about what's going to happen that summer?
Well, it seems to me that my understanding is that the idea of, suggesting a more federal union is viewed with suspicion. They just sort of fought this war against an outside power, a royal power. And to some people, the creation of a more strong union, of a federal union, goes against what they were fighting for. Do you agree?
Yeah, so like you were saying with the comment about it smells like a rat and a rat's called monarchy, to just semi-quote there. It's really, they were coming from a place where they were really heavy-handed on, especially in the latter years of leading up to the Revolutionary War, with all these acts infringing on rights. And now you're talking about giving a federal government that might somehow be a bit bigger than what they have currently. So they want to make sure that rights of the people and of the states are going to not be as affected as much. But so they're really hesitant. They see the past, the history playing out possibly yet again.
And I don't think it's any coincidence that the Bill of Rights ratified, and propositioned as a way to kind of soothe the fears of some of these anti-federalists, very much reflect the grievances in the Declaration of Independence, leveled against King George III and Parliament.
And do we have coverage? So it's a private convention, but are there newspapers being printed about what's happening at Independence Hall? What do we know about it from that angle?
Oh yeah, there's definitely a lot being written. The newspaper articles, it seems to be quite a national story, what's happening in Philadelphia. But they don't really know the inner workings until the Constitution is presented at the end of the summer.
Yeah,
And
you can't, they can't dodge the press. When Washington is here and some of the other well-known men from that time, the press is going to know. They're going to try to get as much information as they can. So, for example, going back to the story I told you earlier, when Washington shakes the hand of the members of the Native Nations who arrived here in Philadelphia that June, it went out into the presses. They knew that he was meeting people and that a discussion about the government was happening here. They just might not have known the minute details of every single day what was going on until that Constitution came to light after September 17th.
And it's because Madison, you mentioned that there was a secretary, official secretary taking notes during the convention. But would we really know what happened in that room that summer in 1787 if Madison hadn't attended every day and taken such detailed notes?
I don't think so. And I mean, the way that I sort of posit it to what I'm giving tours in here is that we know about what happened in here mostly through Madison's perspective, so everything kind of has to be weighed through the perspective of Madison, right? His hearing of the arguments, his understanding of it. So yeah, I mean, other people wrote some notes, but Madison's is by far the most extensive. The main secretary was, I think he was a colonel in or major in the Continental Army. And I don't think his notes are referenced as nearly as much as by historians as Madison's.
And Patrick, can you tell us a little bit about how those notes go from Madison takes these notes in 1787, but then how do we, as the American people, have access to those notes today?
That's a fun historical debate because we really don't have the ones he wrote in 1787. He is probably scribbling as fast as he can. And essentially, when other delegates say, when Madison's not talking, he's writing. And so what we have is a later him transcribing and maybe even enlisting others to help him transcribe these notes. So Luke makes a great point about Madison's perspective, and arguably passage of time, Madison can massage that perspective and kind of curate his legacy a little bit. So there's been some historical debate on, is Madison, as the notes are written out so we can read them, are they accurate to the time, or is he changing them a little bit with time? I think more historians say he's accurate to the time, but there's also a worthy argument on he changes them, and which is why it's fun to visit these places like Independence Hall and think of these men inside the room, the people outside the room. Come walk these grounds at Montpelier and just develop your own thoughts about a more perfect union and think in your own way. How can I engage today? How can I be part of this democratic experiment, really, that's still going on?
So in about 30 seconds, I think a great question for each of you is, why is your place, why is Independence Hall, the room you're standing in, Luke and Suzanne, and the room you're in, Patrick, why is that still important to us today in modern America?
Who wants to go first? Well, I guess we can. Is that all right, Patrick?
You go ahead.
All right. Well, I can tell you my perspective, Suzanne, but I just want to show you folks something, because this is a perspective that visitors never get to see. This is me and Suzanne's perspective when we're giving tours and we see people standing out here. And I can say that there's definitely an energy in this room, whether it's Americans, children, school groups, and you can feel that there's a power here, and it comes from different places, right? One of my favorite quotes, and it has to do with Benjamin Franklin, after his optimism with this chair and this rising sun on it. Let me just show you that real quick, because I don't think I got a chance to. It's really cool. And Franklin said that he believed that this sun on the president's chair was rising and not a setting sun. A few days later, he is at a reception where the delegates are going home, and he's asked by somebody, what kind of government did you gentlemen end up creating? And it's sort of a famous response by Franklin. He says, a republic, if you can keep it. And I think that's such an important part of this story, because we talk about these 18th century figures and these historic buildings and these artifacts, but this is still a story that we're a part of as modern Americans. And Independence Hall specifically has served as a location for people to visit and think about, how do I want to keep this republic? What do I want to keep and what do I want to change to make it my republic? How do I want to be included in this story? And we here at Independence are trying to make a concentrated effort to tell a more inclusive story, to make every American feel that they can see themselves here in the assembly room, in the words of our founding documents. So I'd say from personal experience and, just from my understanding of these events, this is an important place for modern Americans and people from all over the world visit this site.
Definitely, because a lot of international folks also come here to learn about how all this transpired, from how we got independence to having a constitution, because in a lot of their cases, what happened in this room affected their nations. So they want to come here and see where that all started. And going back to that rising sun question, I always ask my tours, how can we, the people of 2023 or whatever year we are currently in, how can we allow that sun to continue to rise as Benjamin Franklin saw it all those years ago? And I do have to tell one little cute story. I had maybe a 3 or 4 year old. He was very good listening to the tour the whole time. And when I asked that question, he instantly, without missing a beat, said, "Let it shine." So even to the youngest and to however old anyone wants to come in here, it does somehow touch upon everybody's lives when they come in here.
How about you, Patrick?
I love that, let it shine. That's pretty hard to beat, right? One of my heroes here is Rebecca Gilmore Coleman. And she says, essentially, if we don't know where we've been, how can we know where we're going? And this place to walk these grounds and contemplate Madison's great ideas about humanity and about factions and how we can treat each other, but knowing where some of this story really got generated, thinking about the enslaved people who makes Madison's life possible, Madison's work possible, seeing these grounds and the beauty and the promise of America, and then getting back to, well, how are we each in our own ways going to let it shine? It's a really fun place to consider that. Thank you so much for tuning in, those of you who did.
Thank you, Suzanne and Luke and the staff at Independence National Historical Park. And thank you, Patrick, for showing us the old library. I hope this program has really whet your appetite, all those who are listening in, to come visit our sites. So we really highly encourage you to visit both Philadelphia and Central Virginia. Independence offers public tours 364 days a year. They have a full slate of exciting programs this summer, from Pride Month, Flag Day, Juneteenth, and of course, Independence Day. And Montpelier is open to the public Thursday through Mondays. We offer a variety of different tours. And in addition to our Juneteenth program offering, I encourage you to check out montpelier.org for that offering. And we also celebrate Constitution Month in September, where we'll have a slate of programs as well. And for those of you who asked questions that we didn't get to, hopefully next time, there might be a part 2 with the Bill of Rights focus in the coming months with Independence. So stay tuned and hopefully we'll get to your questions next time. Thank you all for tuning in, and hopefully we'll see you in person next time.
Yeah, thank you so much. We had a great time, not only showing you Independence Hall, but getting a peek into Madison's study as well.
And we hope to see you all around the park.
Yeah, come see us.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.
All right.